Hello! Welcome to the first tutorial on programming that I'm going to post on the DragonSpire YouTube page. We're going to start off with some basics of C# programming. I assume that you have already downloaded Visual Studio Express. I'm using the 2010 version. You can get it off of Microsoft's website. It's fairly easy to find by Googling it. When you open up the IDE, which also stands for Integrated Development Environment, if you're wondering. When you first open the IDE, you're presented with a splash screen, which isn't showing up on my preview, but I promise it's there. While it loads the actual program, it opens up to a nice blue window. Yours may open up with a start page. I have disabled that because it serves no purpose in my day-to-day activities. The initial view may have the Solution Explorer over here on the right docked and pinned. To unpin it, I usually have it hidden because it takes up valuable space while I'm coding. There's a small button up here that says Auto Hide when you hover over it. If you click on that, it will automatically hide, and if you mouse over it, it will re-show it. Likewise, on the bottom, you have multiple little tabs that you can look at. Those can be hidden and pinned in the same way. You can close them permanently, but I tend to just hide them, as there are times that I use them. Left side, you have what's known as the toolbox. We'll get into that a little bit more later. That's mostly used when you are working with user interfaces. You have your standard controls at the top. Obviously, new project, add new item, open, save, cut, copy, paste, undo, redo, etc., etc., etc. These here are a little bit more advanced. We'll get to those. A search window and some other special windows that have to do with your tabs. Buttons, not windows. To jump right in, to create a new project, I generally use the menu, new project. Our project will be example project 1. You can call yours whatever you want. I'm using example project 1 for now. We'll go with a console application because it's simpler to work with when you're first starting out. You don't have to worry about designing a user or a graphical user interface. Go ahead and name it, press OK, and it'll open up the first window that you will see in your project. It's mostly empty, just a few lines of code. If you go over to your Solution Explorer on the right hand side, you'll notice that it doesn't have very much either. We'll go into detail on what all of the things that you see in the window are here in just a moment. Your solution, which shows the name of your project, is the container that holds all of these sub-projects that you may work on that all relate to this. And if we ever do multiple projects at the same time, I'll show you that. Your actual project is the first collapsible entry here, example project 1. If you right click on it, you get some options. You don't really have to worry about those yet. You can add new folders for organization and code structure. We'll talk about that later. Forms, classes, etc., etc. Your properties button opens up this assembly info. That's more background stuff that you normally won't have to worry about. References are the different pieces of the .NET system that you are incorporating into your code. These are the general ones that you may access from a console application. And the program.cs is the one piece of code or one file that you actually have that references the code in your program to start with. Program.cs is the general name that your program will have for the first piece of code to run in the entire program. We're going to take a look at that now. Okay, everything that you see in blue is known as a keyword. What's in black are simply informational text, mostly linking things together. You can think about I think about it as informational text. They're normally names of things inside of your program. A semicolon, which is the dot with a comma underneath of it, denotes the end of a line of code. You'll see a semicolon at the end of every actual line of code that is not structural. Namespace A namespace is a way to organize your code. It is one container where your code and other containers can go into. We'll get more on how to structure your code later and the proper structuring techniques and the structuring techniques that I use, which may not follow general best practices, but you'll have to bear with me on that. A class is a very complex item that you'll have in your programming, and we will get to that later. That's going to be a large topic of discussion, possibly in a future video. I may touch on it later in this video. These are entirely unscripted, so we may bounce around a bit. As said, the light blue here, or I guess this normal blue, whatever you want to call it, are keywords. Black is names generally. This green here is, it more or less is a definition, I guess, would be your greenish, aqua, teal, whatever you want to call that. Brackets, which are these, are structural to the code in that it lets the compiler, the C# compiler, know when a specific block of code starts and ends. Anything that is inside of a bracket is known as a block of code. So this would be the first block of code, and then this would be the second because it's inside of these brackets, and the third block of code would go inside of these. You'll notice that if you click to the outside of a bracket, not the inside, if you click on the outside of a bracket, it kind of grays the brackets so that you can find the other one. This works in all the different structural symbols, as we'll show later. So brackets denote blocks of code. These parentheses generally, by the way, those are squiggly brackets. You also have the square brackets, but we'll get those later. So squiggly brackets denote blocks of code. Parentheses, is that right? Parentheses? Yeah. Parentheses denote a method or a function, which is basic. This here is a method or a function, whatever you want to call it. Different people have differing opinions. It is a reusable block of code. Obviously, blocks can contain other blocks, but a method is generally one solid block of code that can contain others that is reusable. You reuse it by calling the method name, which as said is in black. So this particular method is the main method. When you call a method, you have to supply it with certain variables or arguments. What is in between your parentheses are arguments. So this particular method has one argument, an argument which consists of a, what did I call those? Bear with me. Sometimes I have problems pulling words. It'll get better as I get more used to doing these videos. You have to have one declaration of type, which in this case is a string, and we'll touch on different types of variables later, and one name for that variable so that you can access it later. So the string with these two brackets is the actual variable, and then the name of the variable is just so that you can access it later on. We're going to go ahead and change this to just regular string args here, because it's easier to work with when you're starting out. If you want to compile your code, by the way, I've never taken the brackets off there, so I'm not sure if it's going to work. If you want to compile your code up to this point, you'll see a little green arrow up here. If you hover over it, it says Start Debugging. When you click on that, it will take all of your code and make it into a working program. In this particular case, I get an error because I removed those brackets. So if we move the square, or put the square brackets back in, future note, we can't remove those square brackets. See, look, I'm still learning stuff. And we press the run button. It will launch the code. You'll notice that, you'll notice the program, which was just a console box because this is a console application. It opened and then immediately closed. I'm sorry about the wind if you can hear it in the background, by the way. It's kind of windy outside. You'll notice that when you run your code, it opens and immediately closes. That's because this main method is called when the program is first run. You can define what method you want to actually run first. Somewhere in the properties we'll show that possibly in a future episode. When it's run, it executes whatever is inside of your main block of code, and when it's done, it closes. Similar to trying to run something from a run command, such as task list. When you run that, it will run the main method in the task list program and then close. You'll notice it opens, it lists all the tasks, and then it closes. That's what it's designed to do. If you run it from within a command prompt and you type task list, it will go through, it will close, it will bring me back to my prompt, but the program itself has closed. It's designed to do that so that it does not keep those resources, and it just closes and goes away. There's nothing left for it to do. In C#, we can do pretty much whatever we want at this point. You can pretty much open-ended. We're going to, instead of using the string variable that comes with our main method, because that is an array, and we'll get to those later, they're complex, too complex for the first video. We'll create a string, which is a type of variable that we'll get to. In the next video, we'll go over all the different kinds of variables. We'll call our string a test, just test. The equals sign lets the compiler know that we are setting that variable's value. A string is simply a set of characters, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, exclamation point, comma, etc. And we can put whatever we want to inside of that, and we'll get to the differences between those as said in the next video. So a string can be pretty much whatever you want. The only exception is that if you put a quote inside of your string, the compiler doesn't know that it's supposed to be part of the string unless you do some special stuff that, once again, we will get to in a future video. This is all very complex. It will sink in over time. If you put a quote inside of a string, the compiler thinks you're wanting to end the string and will try and make anything after it into code, and at this point it has no clue what that means because it's not valid code and it errors out. As said, at the end of any line of code you have to have a semicolon so that the compiler knows where that line ends. If we were to put something after it, it just simply doesn't know what to do with it. If we leave the semicolon off, you'll notice how it shows an error because it's pretty sure that's where the semicolon's supposed to go, but it's not 100% sure. You have to tell it that. So now that we have our first variable, we can run a method that will show the value of our variable on the console screen. To do that in C#, you simply write console and then dot. A dot is very important. You'll notice here real quick that console turned blue. That is because that links up to the declaration of our program class. The aqua blue declaration means that we are accessing a class, in this case the console class. The same thing would happen if I were to type program dot. It would know that we're trying to access the program class. When you type your dot in the Microsoft Visual Studio IDE, you get a pop-up. This pop-up isn't displaying on the example window that I have on my other screen that's showing me the output of the video, but I promise you that when you do press the dot button, you get a small pop-up that allows us to scroll through all the different variables that are in the console class. In this particular case, we're going to do write line, and this is all case sensitive, so you got to be very careful and pay attention to your case. This is a method, so we have to have our parentheses, and at the end of the line we have a semicolon. We need to tell the console.writeLine method what it's supposed to display on the console. If we run our program now, we're not sending it any information, it's not going to show anything. We can simply put a string in here by using our double quotes, and in the middle we can type test string or whatever you want to type. Try and run our program, and you won't be able to see it, but it will pop up there and say test string. In order to prevent our program from closing, we can do console.read, which will wait for something to be put into the console before it continues. We can wait for read, which will read the first letter, read line, which will wait for the first time a line is completed by the user pressing enter. That's what we're going to do. It will wait until we press enter. Now if we run our program by pressing the go key, it will print out our string, which was test string, right here at the console, and it will wait until we press our enter key. And then it will hit the end of the main block and close, just as it did before. Now we don't want it to say test string. We want it to display whatever we have in our variable up here, which we could put anything we want in here. Hello YouTube, for example. Exclamation point. To access a variable, we've already said that what's in black here, is a name. In this case, test is the name of our string variable. If we replace the entire content of our console.writeLine method with the name of the variable that we want to pass, in this case it's test. Now, you may be able to see it. I'll have to look at the video afterwards. There's another overlay here that shows us all of our available variables, and test is one of them. So we want to take test and send it through as a variable to console.writeLine. This takes this whole value here and puts it into console.writeLine. Basically, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but for now you can just think of it that way. It takes the whole variable here and puts it into the console.writeLine method. Now when we hit our play button, in this case, build and run, it will say hello YouTube, and because we still have console.readLine, it will wait for us to press enter before it closes, and then it will subsequently close. It's a very simple language to get used to. I consider programming fun, and like I said, I may not follow best practices on everything, but we can go over some best practices in a future video. In the next video, I plan on showing you different types of variables and how to use them. We're only going to go over the basic variables such as numbers. We'll go over strings again, maybe in a little bit more detail, show you how to use them by showing you how to create, set their values, change their values, and send them into methods. Maybe even how to change what type they are. As I said, we'll go over that in the next video. So until next time, have a wonderful time.